Welcome to the True Sight podcast by Oracle's Elixir, your source for in-depth analytical coverage of professional League of Legends and the rest of the esports world. I'm Tim Magic Sevenhusen. Today we're talking to an analyst, content creator, and high elo mid laner, Prussian. Welcome to the show, Prussian. What have you been up to?
Sitting here waiting for the show to begin. Anticipation.
Yeah, it's been an exciting week, I think, for this kind of scene of kind of the NA amateur scene, and Scouting Grounds is always kind of a highlight of the year for the past several years. You've got, from working in the amateur scene a little bit and from playing with a lot of these players, I think you've got a pretty unique angle on what goes into Scouting Grounds. Is your angle on Scouting Grounds this year any different than it has been in the past? Are you closer to some of the players, or?
I'm definitely closer to many of the players. Typically, my relation to a lot of the players in the past years have just been through interactions in solo queue. I knew maybe a few of them, but this year, as the classes have come through, more and more people I've had more interactions with as I've been in the scene for longer and longer, naturally. So I'm definitely closer to this class relative to the others.
Who are a couple of people that you have kind of closer relationships with specifically?
I have to declare my biases in advance. I'm very, very good friends with Andy Bendy specifically. Otherwise, I've had cordial relations with many of them. Rosethorn comes to mind immediately. APA, I am acquaintances with. And those are the main ones that come off right away.
Cool, yeah, and you worked with Radiance some this year, right? And Andy Bendy played for them. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's part of the relationship there. Yeah, so as we've come into Scouting Grounds, I've been talking to you, getting some of your opinions on this as I put together kind of power rankings for working with Mobalytics going into this event, and we did power rankings. Pace Your Time did a set, I did a set, and then Mobalytics had an AI run a set, and I got some input from Prussian and a bunch of other people to help with those, and I know that we've talked before about how your rankings might differ a little bit from mine. So on this show, we're going to go through some of our updated kind of perspectives on some of the players now that we're a couple days into the event. See who's showing up the way we thought, maybe who's overperforming kind of what we expected a little bit, maybe who hasn't been able to show themselves off as much yet. But before we launch into some of that, and I also want to say off kind of the finale of the show, we're going to have a lot of fun doing a bit of a mock draft of how we think the post Scouting Grounds draft is going to go. So stick around for that. That should be fun. But before we launch into talking about specific players and those kinds of things, there has been some news recently that the format of NA Academy and the amateur scene is due for a pretty big rework for 2021. There haven't really been details coming out. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like, aside from a bit of a hint that it might involve much more overlap between academy and amateur and opportunities for those teams to kind of cross over and play against one another, things like that. So I'd love to get your take on, someone who's kind of been inside that scene, actually competing within it. What are some of the things that you are kind of hopeful for? What do you want that format to look like? What would make the biggest difference for you?
Right. So starting off right away, these changes have been a long time coming. And I know initially the people that were informed of this format had to sign NDAs. And obviously I'm not going to, criminalize anyone and say who informed me of this information. But months in advance, I was knowledgeable that these changes would be occurring, that there would be some sort of integration between academy and amateur. And I also know in advance that more third tier 100x-esque teams would be entering the NA amateur sphere. I know some of the current teams that we're already seeing are already potentially being scouted by professional organizations, and there's going to be a partnership between them in the future. Not naming names specifically.
So you're suggesting, just as a random example, like Cloud9 could partner with Radiance and turn them into a Cloud9 partner team?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just as an example.
Cool.
And with these changes, we're going to see a lot more money going into Tier 3 tournaments. I know certain teams already are building out their support network and their rosters going into next year. And many of these positions are salaried, both for players and for analysts, coaches, managers, all sorts of things. There's a lot of money being poured in, not a tremendous amount like LCS, but the fact, like, it's totally elastic if you think about it. Going from zero, not being paid at all, to being paid any amount is theoretically like infinite increase.
Statistically accurate, I can say.
Yeah.
For sure. So, yeah, so I guess you can't necessarily speak to, what the actual changes will be without, if you do have some inside knowledge of that, leaking that. But if you were going to design this format, let's just frame it that way. If you were going to design the ideal format for an Academy Amateur kind of overlap or a crossover, what would be the main features of that? If you had completely blank slate and they said, okay, Prussian, go ahead, we want you to design the format for this. Let's maybe state some goals up front. What would be the goals that you'd try to achieve with your format?
I think obviously it's a little bit hard because the most immediate example we have of what a sort of amateur format would look like, or what would be most realistic, would be 2020 SGC. But since coronavirus hit SGC, we kind of have to base everything off of idealizations. So hypothetically, I think that more LAN events would be definitely necessary. A little bit more minor, but getting players that sort of stage or live experience should certainly be some sort of priority as the event proceeds. Another big woe that was really facing the 2020 SGC was just the absolute volume of games. These teams, us specifically, we didn't scrim on Radiance because we partook in every single tournament that awarded us SGC points. And we were basically playing every single day throughout the summer. And it could be upwards of 6 games per day, basically. 2 best of 3s. And then you have to factor in rescheduling games and real life obligations. And honestly, the money that's being put into amateur right now in 2020, it wasn't livable. So it was kind of a weird balancing where you have to sort of invest in your future as a player just through playing every day in these tournaments. You didn't really have time to hold down a job if you're a player in the scattering ground circuit. So something I would like to see is more flexibility as far as scheduling goes. I would like to see LAN events once the whole COVID-19 situation is cleared up. And generally speaking, I would like to see more organization, because it felt like there were a lot of teams in the 2020 SGC that kind of didn't go anywhere, or they exploded, or they hit dead ends. And I think that will be solved through contracts. I think that will be solved through more top-down management as opposed to player-run organizations. Not that there's anything wrong with player-run organizations. It's just that those organizations naturally lend themselves to be unstable by design.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. So I think you commented on something that I think will make a big difference to the scene with the introduction of kind of former relationships between LCS, Academy, Amateur, kind of a more straightforward alignment between them, and that is that players will be under contract with a team, right? So like right now, and I may be a little off on this, but the way I understand it is if a player is playing for an amateur team, let's say they are playing for Radiance, and or let's say they're playing, the better example is they're playing for 100 Thieves Next, right? And 100 Thieves Next is interested in next year bringing them up to Academy. But Cloud9 or TSM comes in and goes, no, we want to talk to that player. There's absolutely nothing to stop those LCS teams from talking to them and saying, hey, we're interested in you, come and sign with us. So there's no protective value in adding someone to your amateur team the way there would be, anti-poaching kind of things if you had them in Academy. So if you have a change in structure that allows the players on the amateur teams to be officially part of the 100 Thieves org. Now they're 100 Thieves Next member and they can't be poached, right? To whatever extent that those rules actually can be enforced, which I think they're, it's not bad. And there's always some kind of fuzziness around the edges, and people even in much more established traditional sports with stricter guidelines on that, there's still people kind of teasing around the edges of those rules, but at least there is something in place that says add them to your amateur team, or the amateur team you're partnered with, and you have some element of control over that player's future and ability to invest in them and know you're not just going to have them sniped away from you at the very first opportunity. So getting down to the actual kind of the format of this, the competitive format, what do you think would be most ideal for this? Do you like the idea of a league format, along the lines of an academy, LCS kind of thing? Do you like the idea of, say a monthly tournament cycle where you have to advance through a bracket stage or something like that? What do you think fits the best for developing these players?
That's a difficult question. I think that naturally a league format would be better for developing players, but realistically, as far as what's convenient, I would like to see, if anyone remembers Forge of Champions, it was a bit of I think it's called a King of the Hill style, where there would be a monthly tournament where teams would compete for points in this ladder format, where it would be a big tournament and the seeding would be depending on performances in the last tournament. And teams would go through it's like a tournament. And points would be awarded towards the highest placing teams. And I would like to see a sort of playoffs with the top teams throughout the months. Something like that. It's kind of hard to explain. Something like that is more intuitive if you see it visually, but that would be best from a competition perspective because it would be a relatively low volume of games. But if you're trying to develop these players, I definitely think a league format is the best way to go, because if you're a amateur team, up and coming, low experience, put up against an academy team that has a well-defined, fleshed out coaching staff in the first round of that sort of tournament, you're basically done. And then you have to balance in things like time commitment between teams. So realistically, someone's getting burned either way. So overall, I think it's best to stick to a league format if we're looking for competitional integrity.
Yeah, I think there's always a lot of discussion between kind of tournament circuits versus league formats. You get a lot of people on kind of the CSGO side or the Dota side who really love their open circuit and all the tournaments and how much you get to see the top teams play against each other. But I really think those formats favor the viewers more than they favor the competitors, right? Because you don't get a balanced out set of opportunities to play against everybody else, to encounter all these different styles, to have a regular routine. Honestly, that makes a huge difference. Being able to practice at certain days, compete on certain days, have a certain off days, and not always be constantly reacting and trying to figure out where you're at, right? I think all of that definitely favors a league format when you're prioritizing player development or player experience and team experience above the fan experience. And I think when anything below LCS level, you have to prioritize what's good for the players and teams above what's good for the viewers. That's my take on it, right? So if we do end up with some kind, I think what's really challenging, speaking of the format, and if you're talking about some kind of a league format for an amateur academy crossover, and now, I think one thing that is true of amateurs, there's a lot of fluidity to it. Orgs come and go, teams come and go, players are sometimes kind of forming loose kind of affiliations with each other, and here's 5 players who play together for 3 weeks, play out a tournament, and then they gonna go their separate ways. And I think some of that is beneficial, but when you have a strict league format, then you lose that opportunity to embrace that fluidity. Do you think there's more downside to losing that fluidity? Like what is more important to you, losing the fluidity or maintaining that fluidity, or the actual like really strict league format? I'm not really sure which one is more important, right?
Yeah. Obviously we're gonna, this is just an example. We are always going to have teams or just situations like CLT Phoenix, which was a team that basically collapsed midway through the SGC. And because of the SGC rules, none of these players were capable of rejoining a team after one of their players, he either had obligations, it wasn't really clear. He quit and they had to get a player that just wasn't to the caliber of the other 4 players or the player he was replacing. And that team suddenly became absolutely dead in the water. Another example is XT Esports. A little bit of a different situation because they weren't as active as CLT Phoenix was. But that sort of, we already had a degree of a lack of fluidity in SGC 2020. And I think that while situations like that are completely unavoidable, I think that keeping some sort of rigor, encouraging teams to stay together through rules like we had in SGC 2020 stand to benefit and legitimize the NA amateur scene, because it allows teams to create brands for themselves. I can think of literally dozens of examples of a team that will an organization that will prop up during a UPL split or any sort of amateur tournament split. And then after that split, it's just gone, right? So I think having not necessarily franchising, but encouraging teams to stay together and build their brand through those sort of roster locks are fundamentally good to the growth of the NA amateur scene.
Yeah, for sure. I think it is something that I don't know that there are any really ideal solutions that can bring in the positives from both sides. I think there's a pretty high likelihood, though, that to try to balance that out, you end up with some combination of league-style play and then tournaments, like fairly regular tournaments. That seems pretty likely to me that you'd have monthly or maybe bi-monthly tournaments that allow for a little more flexibility into it, and give a bit more of a high point to, say, maybe viewers aren't tuning in weekly for the league play, but now there's the monthly tournament and you get to see people kind of advance their bracket and you kind of have a hype moment that kind of like waxes and wanes throughout the year. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the format actually ends up. I've had people tell me that they're very excited about it and that I should have a positive kind of set of expectations for it, but I don't know any of the details yet. I hope it doesn't take too long to iron those out and get those announced. But we will find out. So let's move on. Let's talk about what's happening this week. Scouting Grounds is going on. We've referenced kind of the power rankings going into it, players that we really had a high opinion on. And now we've actually seen a couple days of games. We've been unfortunately struggling through some technical issues, a variety of different things, pretty much very heavily outside of the control of Riot or the teams or players. But doing the best we can with it. We have seen a bunch of games happen. There's more to come. And if you had to name a couple of players who have been kind of standing out to you, especially players who maybe you didn't expect to show up as well as they have so far, who's really been on your radar?
The biggest one for me definitely has been Tomio, because I had no clue how he's been playing with a amateur team called Zenith, but that's been his first real stint in amateur. I had no clue how he would adapt to a completely different team environment towards what he was faced with initially on Zenith, and he has been extremely promising as a prospect. Other than that, I think even though I had him very highly rated, I thought NXI has just been consistently a standout star. Who else would strike my fancy?
I'd say you and I disagreed a little bit coming into the event on Shady.
Yeah.
Right? Like I had him fairly low in my power rankings. You had him a little higher. I believe you had him above Otto as you thought he was the best support coming into the event.
Yes. Right? Yes, I did.
And I would say my impression of Shady has definitely notched up a little since then. Coming in, I'm starting to agree a little more with you that he's doing some pretty good things. Like people talked about his playmaking and aggression, and I've definitely been seeing that. He's been leaning into opportunities, jumping up and making plays, doing some pretty good stuff. Yeah, I agree. I think people have this preconceived notion of Shady and a lot of the older prospects in general, that a lot of these players they don't have anything left to offer. And I've always been someone who's pretty against that, especially for someone who's been out of academy or just out of premier, tier 1 play like Shady. I think that his time at MU in collegiate and NA amateur has actually done a lot for him. And I think he's really honed his versatility in the tier 3 NA leagues. Yeah, for sure. We'll have to see whether it's enough, right, to put him into that that region of the event where people want to pick him up with a draft pick or want to move him into academy or anything like that. I'm not sure of that yet, but he has been a couple notches above what I expected. Tomio as well, I would say, has been a little better than I expected coming in. For my part, I think Tomio has definitely benefited a lot by the play of his team around him, and it doesn't take away from a player when the team sets them up and they execute well on it. You see this a lot from bot laners, right? Like, it gets really tough sometimes to evaluate bot laners because their ability to play well depends on whether they get good engages or good protection or stuff like that. So you have to evaluate them in a bit of a different way. But and so I kind of like see Tomio as, in that sense, sort of a bot laner. Like, his team is making map control plays and engage plays, and he's going in there and he's following up well. And like, credit to him for following up and taking what's in front of him. I'd say Copy is another guy. I mean, along those lines, Copy is. I had very high expectations of him coming in, and so far he's delivering pretty well. He's doing kind of the rock solid kind of mid lane anchor kind of a role that we kind of expected from him coming in. NXI has definitely stood out to me as well. Yunbi is a guy that I've said a few times I had very little information about him coming in, and didn't really know. I got to see like 2 games of his from like 6 months ago. It was very hard to gather good info. And he hasn't been super consistent, but he's had some really good games, and he hasn't really thrown anything away. He picked up a pentakill on Rise in one of the games. That was very impressive. I thought he's had pretty good overall kind of awareness and execution of what he needs to be doing within the game. How has Yunbi looked to you?
I thought, it's a little bit strange because Yunbi hasn't necessarily ever struck me as a really big Twisted Fate player, but in the context that he's playing with a very strong jungler in NXI, it suddenly put into context, it makes much more sense for me. Yunbi has always been, for me, a really hard carry player, and I was really interested in the dynamic early on how NXI Yunbi 2v2 would look, because Yunbi is typically the type of player I would see where, this person's jungler should play to him because he's so strong mechanically. He really knows how to use his advantages very well that he acquires passively in laning phase just by being a fantastic laner. Whereas on the other hand, NXI is someone who benefits most from a mid laner like Copy, someone who is a facilitator, someone who plays for his priority and constantly rotates to his jungler and just facilitates all of the aggression that NXI naturally has. But this sort of strange dynamic has actually been working pretty well for Team Ocean. And while I think it's actually a little bit less efficient as a pairing like APA and NXI or Copy and NXI, I still think it works very well because they are fundamentally 2 very good players, even if their play styles aren't necessarily one-to-one for each other.
Yeah, for sure. And it is interesting in seeing the way that duo goes. The mid-jungle duo is always such an important pairing, and I've been really encouraged in the way those two have been working together, and especially with how much NXI has been willing to kind of make things happen and know what's supposed to happen next and what his role is in it, and being able to go and think, okay, my pathing is, I'm a few rotations in, I'm going to path from here to here, and we're going to set up for that play next, and being able to make sure his team is organized around that. And not requiring his mid laner to dictate that for him either. So that's a positive thing for sure. Let's see. Anybody else that we want to really call out here? Do you have anyone else on your list? We have the players like Shoryu, who I think we all kind of thought coming in was going to be a big deal, and he has been.
Yeah, I think Shoryu is likely the player that I feel is maybe the strongest of the event right now. He's just been absolutely head and heels, so amazing.
He's been winning lane things. Like, he's been getting 2v2 kills in lane, which I didn't kind of expect to happen. I expected that he would kind of, go even in lane a lot. But it depends on the level of competition he's up against, right? And this is, this is in some ways the cream of the crop of amateur, but in other ways it's just players who have been thrown in together. So you would expect that if he does have solid laning in general, this is a chance for him to kind of step up and do a little more, and he has been. But, I didn't expect quite so much early game dominance, and then what he's been doing in mid and late game has been what I did expect, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think AD carry in general I went into this event thinking it was the strongest role, and I feel somewhat validated because I still think it is the strongest role.
Yeah.
Even I think that some of the players are maybe held back stylistically from how they prefer to play laning phase, and specifically, I think Andy Bendy is not performing to the highest expectations.
Mm-hmm.
But in the context that he's playing with auto, and when I saw Andy Bendy auto, I immediately thought this might not be a pairing that's going to work out too well, because Andy, I know, is a player who is always looking for advantages in the laning phase. He always prefers to take the 2v2, like very aggressive, like trading wise. And while Otto, I think, isn't a bad support, I think that he is a player that's more the in-game leader type, where I think Team Cloud doesn't necessarily need that skill set from a support. And on the other hand, we have a player like Spawn, who I also thought was very good coming into this event. And while Plux is one of the weaker supports of the event, I think that that lane is still pretty salvageable between the two, because Spawn is a more scaling style player. He doesn't prefer to take these trades. He prefers to keep his health very high, and he focuses on farming, and he's just going to out team fight you. He's not going to take those 2v2 risks in lane. He's not going to confront you for a trade. And I think that he isn't as limited by the actions of his support in the laning phase.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. You definitely, if you were constructing a roster out of these players intentionally and not, drafting against other teams, you might have constructed a few other pairings stylistically. Maybe put Shoryu with a Joey, or with I'm losing my train of thought here a little bit, but you'd pair, these conservative bot laners with a conservative support, aggressive bot laners with aggressive support. We've
Yes.
seen how the right type of pairing can really unlock a player. When you look at like FBI and Huhi and Golden Guardians, for example, you got just the right support, and suddenly he's the best bot laner in the league, which is not to say he might not have been otherwise, but it just brings out the best in each other, right? The sum becomes more than, the whole becomes more than the sum of its parts. So, yeah, there's been definitely a lot of players kind of making good impression. We've got a few more days to go here, and a lot more opportunity for players to kind of rise up and keep performing well. So hopefully that will continue to happen today and over the next few days. I want to keep the show moving here and look at some questions that have come in from listeners, and specifically Gus Lockhart, who's a great supporter of the show. He had some questions here, so I want to run through a couple of these because I think they're really good discussion topics in general that I wish I just made subjects of the show to start with. So first of all, again, you being a little deeper in the amateur scene than I have, do you see anyone, I'll just read the question directly. Do you think anyone got snubbed from Scouting Grounds? Anyone you would have wanted to include if there had been extra spots?
Am I allowed to talk about players that got behavior checked?
You are.
I think Shiden is very talented if he is capable of controlling himself. I think he's a very mechanically talented jungler, one of the best solo queue junglers in general. Granted, I'm pretty sure, I can't remember if it was Rosethorn or Tomio who got the spot because he got snubbed, but Tomio has been worthwhile replacement, even though I don't like calling him a replacement.
Yeah.
I wonder if there's anyone else. Obviously, I have to throw out Young mid. I think he is a very talented mid laner. He has a very wide champion pool, whereas I think some of the mid laners here, like Shrimps or APA, are perhaps limited by their pool. Young excels in the regard that he can play. He's extremely stylistically diverse relative to most of NA Amateur. And those are just two that come to mind right away.
Yeah, no, those two have definitely. I came across Young, especially watching some of these VODs, and thought, there's a pretty decent player. At one point, I had a little short list of players in a note somewhere in case I had a good opportunity to make some content with it, like some players who aren't at Scouting Grounds, like amateur scene players who aren't at Scouting Grounds who maybe are worth looking at for Academy, and like Five Fire's on there, and Young was one of the players that I was looking at as well. I have a lot less awareness of what might come out of solo queue directly rather than out of the amateur scene, but yeah, a couple names there worth looking at. Second question, do you think the draft after Scouting Grounds is really helpful for anything? I feel like it's just trying to mimic traditional sports, says Gus, but I would be curious to hear an insider's thoughts on what purpose it serves. And so to be clear to people listening who might not be familiar, after the Scouting Grounds event, there is a Each of the 10 teams gets to draft one player. They receive a 10-day exclusive negotiation window with that player, and then if they don't sign them during that, then they become just standard free agent. And this happens right at the start of the free agency period. So, it gives them a pretty nice little exclusivity window. So what are your thoughts? How valuable do you think that draft actually is?
It's a little bit conflicting because obviously I'd like to say the draft is the best thing that happens, but realistically, I'm kind of cynical. I know that some of these players already have exclusivity deals with teams. I know that some of these players are going to be in academy next split, and I'm not going to name names, but the team that they're on is already decided. So I think it definitely depends year by year. We saw years like in 2017 where the draft mattered a lot, and we saw players like Blabber just comes to mind. I think I can't remember if he was 2016 or 2017, but we saw Kumo, and back then he was known as League A or just League, got picked up from the draft if I recall. And excuse me, there's some examples like that you can look back in the years, but right now I'm not so sure how impactful the draft is, especially if we look back just to last year when I think every single mid laner got drafted. It was, I'm not going to remember all the names, but not very many of them got picked up. I think it was Evolved and maybe one other. And then everyone else, their exclusivity got waived.
Yeah, it seems like the draft is a little more for entertainment and for show and for the fun of it than it is for teams actually kind of locking in a player. But It does happen sometimes, right? And I think what I wonder is, do improvements in the actual talent pool at the event, and I think most people would agree that that the talent pool at this event is at least the strongest since 2017. And I think as the talent pool increases, maybe you do see that encourage more actual signings to come out of it. I would like to think so, because I think it's definitely fun for the fans to look at and see what happens. And I hope the teams kind of take it seriously and use it well, but we'll have to see. Okay, and finally, Gus Lockhart's third question here. I'm really curious about collegiate esports. They feel even more like something drawn from traditional sports that maybe doesn't transfer to league as well. Pros in other regions tend to be really quite young. I wonder if trying to create a 2+ year pipeline that's really static is the best approach, or if it makes more sense to not tie it to schools because players develop at much more random rates. So I guess the question implied by this is, do you see collegiate as a legitimate talent pipeline into the LCS, or is it more of a parallel system that isn't necessarily a good feeder system that way, like the NBA or NFL might receive?
Yeah, I think Gus is really hitting with the questions today. Personally, I wish we had Fletcher here, Flizzy Fletch. He is definitely a name that I think would love this question, but I would say I don't think collegiate esports is super legitimate as far as it goes towards broadcasting talent towards professional organizations. And the real reasoning is I think collegiate esports is useful to an extent for organizing players, but I think that the level of collegiate is so low relative to amateur that it's not super useful until you get to the very top of collegiate. And at that point, it basically becomes discount NA amateur. I don't think schools in North America in general are the most ideal place towards generating talent. In specific because I think high schools are naturally averse to video games and the perception, like video games, esports still have a negative perception. And that's definitely deeply ingrained in high school and public schools in general. In university, I think that esports is mostly a recruitment tactic. And I think if anyone has experience with collegiate esports, you will see that that it's written on the walls, especially when you see most systems or most programs don't even have a coach. They have a director with the title coach, or they have a sports coach that knows nothing about the game, quote unquote, coaching you. It's mostly a recruitment tactic. And I don't think past schools like Maryville or really developed programs. It's just a way for schools to make money from a realistic perspective.
Yeah, I know. I think that makes sense. It's it's something for me where I've kind of felt there's a certain physical maturing process in traditional sports where you get collegiate football, collegiate basketball, things like that, where there's such a whole continuum from from being a kid through high school, through college, and then you're kind of physically maturing up into the point where now you're ready to make that jump. And occasionally you got players who don't go through the whole college system or only a little bit of it, but that's more the exception, right? There's not the same physical maturing process in esports, and also not the same requirement of amount of time to develop, right? You could get somebody who in 2 or 3 years goes from kind of relative nothingness into being LCS quality if they get the right development curve, and that's just not the case in traditional sports. So yeah, I think college can produce players who could come into LCS, because I also don't like the idea that players kind of age out of their potential and suddenly they're 23, 24 years old and they can't get better enough to to come into the pro scene. And I don't agree with that. I think people might peak at different times, and you get them in the right system, get them the right coaching, and maybe they could come out of college graduate age and come into the LCS still. So I don't think it's too straightforward in either direction. But I don't think college is a primary talent pipeline or like a chain in the link of going into LCS really makes a lot of sense. I think what's going on kind of the amateur and academy side and creating a smoother pipeline there is a lot more straightforward. And I like the idea of having college teams competing within that amateur scene, right? I think that has been a positive and something I've liked seeing. Cool. Well, thanks for those questions, Gus. If you want to submit questions in the future for future episodes, stay tuned on Twitter. And also I post about those in the Discord and on Patreon. So make sure you guys check out those links and you can submit questions and future guests. Try to give a little bit of notice in advance of who the guest is going to be. Let's cap the show off with the highlight, I hope, of doing a bit of a Scouting Grounds mock draft. So we're only halfway through the event, right? There's going to be a lot more info to gather. But we're doing this show on Thursday, and this is where we're at with the info we have, and also a lot of info we have coming into it. We also don't know a lot what's going to happen in the rest of the off-season as free agency opens in a few days. But based on the info we have today, we're going to role-play a little bit, a mock draft of, let's say, Scouting Grounds. Scouting Grounds just ended. We've come up with a draft order, and we're going to kind of alternate. The way we're going to structure this is we're going to go, obviously, picking from 10 through 1. I've made an order of the teams based on regular season finish first, and then when 2 teams went out in playoffs and some are in the same round, we kind of did a tiebreaker with where they finished in the regular season. So the draft order we're ending up with here: Immortals get first pick, then CLG, Dignitas, 100 Thieves, Evil Geniuses, Golden Guardians at 5, Cloud9, Team Liquid, FlyQuest, and TSM is the last pick. That may be the order that actually happens. I may be a little bit off, but we will see. So this is the order we're going to run with. We're going to alternate who has final control of the pick. We'll both talk about who we think might be worth going after. But Prussian's going to start out with control of the first pick, and we'll kind of alternate from there. So Prussian, you're on the clock. You are Immortals, and you have the first pick of the Scouting Grounds mock draft. Who is at the top of your list?
I'm assuming we're doing this from the context of the team, correct?
Yes. Yeah. Let's go with what we actually know they're working with, or what we think they're working with.
So from Immortals Academy and Immortals LCS, we don't have a great amount of information. I've heard Insanity is staying as the starting mid laner for Immortals, which I think is a great decision. Personally, since we know Potluck, they announced that he's going to stay as the Academy jungler. I would like to see a mid lane pick that would thrive around Potluck stylistically. Mm-hmm. So Potluck is known as a Lee Sin player, a Rek'Sai player, really known for the early game aggressive champions. Not that he can't play the Graves or the farming junglers, but I would like to see Dunby picked up number 1 for Immortals. And my reasoning is I think that if he has a jungler that can really facilitate him, really funnel gold into him throughout the early game, I think Yunbi is the best carry player out of the mid lane prospects at the current Scouting Grounds.
Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty good pick. I think Immortals could go different directions. I think they're at a point as an org where they don't only need to think about what they need now. They could be thinking what might be best for them in 2 or 3 years. But I think Yunbi is a good choice. I think it is very valuable to have a strong domestic mid laner, right? We've seen that for such a long time that gives you so much more flexibility on the rest of your roster. And this guy has been really coming on strong, right, recently. And yeah, I don't really have any issues with that pick. I think it makes a lot of sense. So next up, my pick. I'm role-playing CLG with the second pick of the draft. I've got really very little to go with organizationally right now. There have been some pretty recent rumors about what they're doing in their LCS team, but I don't think I'm worried about what's going on in CLG LCS right now. I'm looking at who is going to be the best player for me over the next 2, 3, 4 years. The person coming to mind for me, and I'm not quite ready to lock in, probably Niles is definitely an option. I would say NXI is also definitely an option. There's been a lot of talk here. Shoryu is also an option. So it's going to be between Niles, NXI, Shoryu, and I have to kind of narrow it in from there and talk myself through it a little bit. At Jungle, there's been a lot of talk about Zaun and whether he actually whether his stock has been too low coming in. I actually put him a little lower in my power rankings than a lot of other people were saying. And from what I've seen at the actual event, he hasn't really broken through for me. I think I've been more impressed with NXI. I've even been a little more impressed with Tomio, maybe. Hard to say. But I would probably pick NXI up first over him right now. And the question then is, between those three players, I would say Shoryu is probably the best of them right now. But I want to really index on potential. I think I would end up picking NXI here. That's what I'm going to lock in. Second pick of the draft, CLG, take NXI.
Yeah, the two names that were really standing out for me are NXI and Shoryu. So when I'm looking, I mean, from a CLG Academy perspective, I thought Wind was one of the best players in their team. I don't think Niles is a fantastic pick here because I'm assuming they're going to stick with Deus because I thought he was a fantastic top laner. I thought that Wind was really good, and I thought Fragus was definitely one of the weaker players. And even if you're just looking from a positional perspective, I thought Fragus was one of the weaker junglers in Academy. So NXI I see as a complete upgrade. I think that's a fantastic pick for CLG.
Cool. So we've had Yunbi at 1 for Immortals. CLG take NXI at 2. Dignitas is on the clock next. Who are you looking at?
So I hate to say it, but I do think that a top laner is most ideal here. I think Asta has been a great player for Dignitas Academy. I'm not sure what their jungle situation is going to be like or mid or support. I don't think these supports or any of these guys would work super fantastically with Asta. I'm looking for a top laner. Between Niles and Rodov, I would prefer Niles. We saw it just last night. We saw Rodov's signature Kennen versus Tony Top's signature Jax, which is a matchup favored towards Kennen. And we saw Tony Top just, Tony did absolutely really well into that Kennen. And whereas Niles has, he got solo killed by Tony Top's Ornn. That's the big thing that people are going to point out to me. I think that a lot of Niles' errors have been at the expense of him overplaying the situation. Yeah. His mid and jungle and sword support, obviously I don't like to call these guys out, but they haven't been performing towards the caliber that we see players like NXI or Copy or Shady. So Niles is trying to put on the carry pants, and I think that he's running into some issues. But I still think that he is mechanically the best top laner, and I think that he has a lot of potential as a player.
Yeah, I think Niles is a guy who his stock before the event is going to carry him a lot more than what we've seen from him at the event so far. And I completely agree. He's been overplaying a little bit. He's been, and I called that out coming in, like in the power rankings when I wrote about him a little bit. I called about how he tries to sometimes do too much with what's in front of him. And I think, I definitely think we've seen that, and you've hit that on the head. So let's keep moving. Next pick, fourth pick of the draft. To recap here, Immortals take Yunbi at 1, CLG take NXI at 2, Dignitas take Niles at 3. Fourth pick of our mock draft, 100 Thieves. Boy, so now let's just go by best players of the event so far. We've narrowed it down. I was looking at NXI, Niles, and Shoryu with my previous pick. it seems natural that Shoryu would slot in here. I think it's, the only reason he falls any further is people just don't need a bot laner kind of a thing. 100 Thieves, I think, have enough depth to their organization that whether they're playing him in Academy or whether they're playing him on their Tier 3 team, whatever they're going to do there, I think they can find a place for him. I think they can continue to work with him, and I think it's just too much to let a player of that quality drop lower than this. So I think 100 Thieves are going to lock in Shoryu at the fourth pick.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it's almost sort of a snipe away from other teams too, if you think about it. I think Shoryu has been the best AD carry at the event so far, and I think any of these teams could lock in Shoryu and be like, yeah, you're better than our Academy bottom laner, as harsh as that might sound. Like, he's just clearly ready for Academy. I think he's the most complete player, and I think that he is the most Academy ready out of all of these players here.
Yeah, I agree. So Evil Geniuses come in at pick 5. What are you looking at? If you need a little help kind of scrolling through the list here, make sure that you have the whole list in front of you. It's easy to let players slip through the cracks as we look at this.
Yeah, I'm thinking mostly about what EG needs as a team. EGA, Onda was great. Giyu has potential, a bit of a champion pool issue, but mechanically he's amazing.
If we believe the rumors, Deftly is out of that team, so they've got a slot to fill.
Out of all the bottom laners, man, I feel like there's just no bad option. Honestly, I'd have to go with Spawn, even though I think Jan and Andy are absolutely fantastic players. I like Spawn stylistically. I think that he is very versatile with the supports that he can work with. He isn't like Andy, where he would prefer an aggressive support. And I think Jan is more Jan's versatile too, but I think Spawn's carrying capacity is on par nearly with Shoryu's. And I think that Spawn has a lot of potential, and I've always thought Spawn has a lot of potential, and I think EG would benefit a lot from raising Spawn into a big talent.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything you just said. So let's move on to the next pick. We're on pick 6. So quick recap. IMT take Yanbi, CLG take NXI, Dig take Niles, 100T take Shoryu, EG go with Spawn at pick 5, and now Golden Guardians is up with pick 6. So there are a handful of players I'm still pretty interested in. Golden Guardians is another org where I'm not too concerned about what my overall org chart looks like. Based on a lot of rumors and things out there, they're going to be remaking a lot of their LCS team, if not the entire thing anyways. So I'm picking a player, again, just based on best available, any role. A couple guys I'm looking at, I think Copy is definitely up there. I think Zaun, depending on your perspective on him coming in, you're going to base a lot of that on kind of pre-scouting grounds, I think. Rodov is one who seems pretty interesting. Again, hasn't had the best scouting grounds showing so far. And I think if I'm interested in some of these guys, you also think who might you be able to get without drafting them. I'm going to land on Copy here. I think of the players remaining on the list, he's probably, to me, the best all-around player. And somebody I'm pretty interested at getting some reps in the academy level at tier 2 and seeing how much more I can help him grow.
Yeah, I mean, I think Copy is a good choice. My only question is, where is a Blaze Olive going? Because that's clearly a player that's been on the upper spectrum of academy mid-laners. Not that there's anything wrong, because I see a tremendous amount of potential in Copy too. Personally, I would have pivoted towards Tomio, because I think Tomio is an extremely raw talent. And I think under the leadership of, assuming Zion Spartan is staying, I feel like that could be pretty nasty together. I think that Tomio is in need of a strong leader figure, especially in-game, to guide him through, where not necessarily micromanaging him, but just, nudging him in the correct direction. And I think the veteran's presence of someone like Zion Spartan would be a tremendous benefit to Tomio.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So if we move on through the draft, then you're next with your Cloud9 pick. Are you still looking at Tomio there, or does the context change?
Well, Inori has just left. Honestly, no one really knows what Cloud9 Academy is going to look like. I would assume it would probably keep leaning into OS players. I think that the O's pool for jungle is definitely the weakest there. So I would pick up Tomio for Cloud9. I think that he fits very well into the Cloud9 Academy idea of we're mostly going to be focusing on developing new talent. And I think Tomio would just be a fantastic pickup for them. He fits in perfectly with the style of junglers that they've been producing historically.
Yeah, no, I can see that for sure. And I think we've already talked through the reasons why you'd be looking at Tomio here. I think very much from the perspective of kind of pretty raw, inexperienced player who you hope that you can coach really well. I think C9 have a pretty good record of coaching young players well and developing them. And then whether you end up promoting them, whether you end up kind of selling the contract off, I think they're a pretty good org for him to land in. All right, so I'm up next. Pick 8 of the draft is Team Liquid. Team Liquid need to refresh their entire sub-LCS level because they might stick with Jenkins in top lane. I don't think... maybe they continue running with Rhino at support. I'm not sure, but I think they can pretty safely look at everything they've got there and just say we're gonna replenish our academy system. So I'm not. There's a pick I'd kind of reach for. I'm not sure I'm ready to quite go for it yet. I'm probably looking at the jungle position here, and I would. There are 3 or 4 good choices at this level, right? And I'm probably going to go with Zaun if I'm Team Liquid. I'm really tempted to pick up Rosethorn, but his scouting ground showing has been kind of weak so far. I need a little more info on him, and I think I can probably, if I pick Zaun and end up deciding after more conversations and maybe some tryout games or something like that I'm still not super thrilled, I think I can pivot to Rosethorn pretty easily post a draft. So I'm going to draft Zaun. I think it's a less likely pick to be available if I don't, post exclusivity window, and that's where I'm going to land there.
I agree. I think Zaun is maybe at the. I don't think he fits stylistically well with the team that he has because. I think Zaun is one of those players that relies. He would work better with a player like Yunbi. He would prefer to play towards his laners, whereas APA prefers to play towards his jungle. So it's a little bit of the reverse of Team Ocean, where you have 2 players that would prefer to play towards themselves. Mountain is a team that has a mid jungle that would prefer to play for the other position. We saw that from Supernova. Odd Orange, just one of the best 2v2, like mid jungle 2v2s. From the entire event in general. And it's kind of a weird situation. I think Rosethorn probably needs more time in Amateur. I don't think that he is ready for Academy. I think that he has a decent degree of potential, but I don't think he's there yet. And I think if you are looking for a jungler, Zaun's the one that's left. And I wouldn't be upset picking him up for an exclusivity window.
All right, so we're on to pick 9. Quick recap, IMT picked Yunbi, CLG picked NXI, Dig picked Niles, Hunter T picked Shoryu, EG picked Spawn, GG picked Copy, C9 picked Tomio, TL picked Zaun, and now we're up 9th and second last pick. FlyQuest gets their choice. This is your pick, Prussian. What are you going for?
I would ideally like an 80 carry here. Between Jan and Andy is so hard. And I feel like if I pick Andy, it would be entirely because of my bias. And also, Jan shouldn't go undrafted. That's kind of criminal. Judging only by Scouting Grounds performance, I would say Jan is 100% more deserving in this context. I think that while Joey has been a better performing support than Otto at this event, I think Jan has kind of came into his own as an 80 carry. He was the lowest gold share 80 carry, even if you subtract all of the Senna games throughout the entire SGC. And at this event, he's shown that he has much more to him. He is a premier carry on Ocean. He is capable of operating with different levels of resources, which is something that's kind of most 80 carries aren't always capable of having the same degree of effectiveness they have that sort of spectrum of, oh, he's okay when given this amount, but he's really good when given this amount. I think Jan is always really good no matter how much you give him. And he's capable of carrying, he's capable of playing weak side, he's capable of everything. And I think that versatility would be very useful, especially since we don't quite know what FlyQuest Academy is going to be looking like in the 2021 season.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we'll wrap it off with the final pick of the draft. And it's a little strange because I'm, drafting for half these teams. And so I can, kind of let the player I wanted the last round fall. But I think organizationally, the TSM, they have at Academy, they've got a jungler that they probably want to stick with at the Academy level. They've got, a bot laner that I'm not sure whether they'll stick with double lift or promote lost, whatever it's going to be. I think what I'm looking for is either a player who I think I can slot into Academy or a tier 3 player who needs more time to develop behind what I've already got in tier 1 and 2. I'm going to take the latter approach. I'm going to pick up Rosethorn with the last pick of the draft. I'm going to sit him in my tier 3, and I'm going to see if he can play his way into Academy or not. I think this guy has a ton of potential. I think we're not seeing it due to whether it's some kind of like nerves or team context or other issues, but everything I've seen of Rosethorn before this event makes me really excited about what he could become, what he could grow into. And so I'm going to take that approach as TSM. I'm going to slot him into my org chart as the tier 3 jungler. And I'm going to see what he turns into.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a fair pick. I would like to see if Peter Hussein can have his way with Rosethorn and develop him into a fantastic jungler. The other pick I'm maybe looking forward to is someone like APA, someone who obviously has a lot of raw, undeveloped potential. I think that TSM's relatively expansive coaching staff could have tremendous benefits for APA, and I definitely see a lot of potential in him as a player. Otherwise, is there anyone else I'm looking at?
Otto, Rodov, Shady, I think these are players who be a little bit of a surprise that they don't get picked up. Those would be other ones I'd look at this slot.
Yeah, maybe Rodov is one that I might be looking at, especially since Dokla hasn't been super amazing for TSM Academy. But I think between Rosethorn and APA, I think those would be two of the better picks for TSM at this point in the draft.
Cool. So let's give that draft a final recap to close things off here. So with the first pick of the draft, we said Immortals take Yunbi. Second pick of the draft, CLG take NXI at the jungle. Third pick, Dignitas take Niles at top lane. Fourth pick, 100 Thieves take the bot laner Shoryu. Fifth pick, Evil Geniuses take a second bot laner of the draft at Spawn. Pick 6, Golden Guardians go for Copy, a mid laner. Pick 7, Cloud9 take the jungler Tomio. Pick 8, Team Liquid take Zaun, another jungler, which is the third jungler of the draft. Pick 9, FlyQuest take Yeon. So that is, is that all 4 bot laners? No, that's 3 bot laners. 3 bot laners, 3 junglers, and then pick 10, we had TSM taking Rosethorn. So all 4 junglers going and 3 bot laners. No supports on this list. I believe only 1 top laner, a couple of mids. So I think that's, we'll see how much the reality matches what we're projecting here. It's going to be really interesting to see what the real draft looks like. And I believe you're going to get a lot of opportunity to talk about that, are you not?
Yeah, so I will be on the analyst desk on the 14th, and I get to see all these picks live, and I'll get to talk to them with everyone on the official Riot Games LCS stream, which will be very exciting.
Yeah, for sure. So, good luck on that show. And afterwards, you can look at whether you think the real draft was anywhere near as good as what we came up with. We will find out. But thanks very much for joining on the show. We're going to wrap it up there, Prussian. Anything you want to shout out? Anywhere that people can make sure to follow you and your content?
I guess you can find me on Twitter at Prussian Law. You can check out my YouTube. It's just Prussian. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was a ton of fun. I'm sure we'll be talking to you more in the future as well. And really looking forward to, again, seeing the end of Scouting Ground, seeing the draft, seeing what gets announced about the Academy and Amateur format. So stay tuned to all those things. You can support the True Sight podcast at patreon.com/OraclesElixir. You can subscribe to the show on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms, or head to anchor.fm/TrueSight and subscribe there. And definitely check out the Oracle's Elixir Discord server, which you can access through oracleselixir.com. Hang out with us and talk about League of Legends esports, about drafts, about data science, all of those things. So we'll throw links for all of that into the show notes. Thanks very much for joining us. Thank you to Prussian for being on the show, and thank you for listening.